All right, so here we are starting on the roof rack. And I just want to take a minute to admire the amount of reference I've gathered so far at this point. I think I started out with like just 10 or 15 images and constantly looking for reference. I think there's been a few nights on this project where I just spent like 30, 45 minutes looking for reference images of different parts of this car. So that's a part of the process for sure. And you eventually do become kind of proud of that result. So here I'm just spending some time thinking about the placement for the roof rack. Because this is it's on different models, and the roof rack is kind of the same style on all the models, but it's also a little bit different. So I am just kind of needing to eyeball some things and just kind of, I would like to know what you guys think about these time lapses. When I originally started this project, my intention was to do as few time lapses as possible. Just because it's kind of like a pet peeve of mine, right? I remember learning this stuff and being so disappointed when I'd click on a tutorial on YouTube, because it would say it's a tutorial, but then it just shows a time lapse. And that's really not what I was after. So, let me know what you think about these time lapses. Is it just me that kind of hates time lapses, or is it everyone? But we're at a point in this project, I think, where if I don't do time lapses, it's going to be like an endless project. I need to figure out a way to kind of speed some things up here. And I'm, for the most part, in a lot of these situations, I'm just kind of reiterating things that I've already talked about. So it just feels a little bit redundant to me to continue explaining the way that my approach to kind of modeling things when I've already explained them over and over and over again, which, I don't necessarily mind doing for educational purposes, but I also don't want to flood your YouTube page with just like 100 different videos. I'm trying to make most of these less than an hour. So, they're watchable, and they're in segments that are long enough where you get a decent amount of information, and, it kind of minimizes the amount of videos that we have. So let me know what you think about that, whether it's in Discord or on YouTube or in person. Just let me know how you feel about these time-lapse videos, because I have a certain stigma when it comes to time lapses, but I know that it may be different for everyone. So here I am just kind of beveling all of my corners. And now I'm not beveling all of my edges. I want to be very clear about that. I'm just beveling my corners. Now we are modeling high poly, and if you look up at the top left of my screen, you'll see that we're getting pretty high. We're getting, around 1.3 million tries in our scene, which is fine. Maya can handle millions and millions of tries. And I think probably a quarter of that is just our tires, because our tires are very dense model wise. But like I said, Maya can handle a lot of tries. And when you're going for realism, like a cinematic or something like that, you can be a little bit more careless with your poly count. Now, that doesn't mean you can be careless with how you model things, right? You still need to kind of nail down your polygon modeling concepts and things like that, so you don't get like weird surfaces, weird bending and lumpiness in your models and artifacts and things like that. So that doesn't mean you can just ignore sort of like core modeling concepts, but it does mean you can be a little bit more lax with your poly count. Now, a lot of times what people do, and I may do this to this car at some point, a lot of times what people will do is model a very high poly version of their model. And then they'll build either a low poly cage around it or a low poly model around it, or they'll take their high poly model and kind of reduce it down so it's a very low poly model. And what that will allow you to do is take your low poly model. So you're going to end up with two different models. You're going to have a low poly and a high poly. You can just do the UVs for your low poly, and then you can bake a normal map from your high poly to your low poly. So all of the smooth curves and all the smoothness you get will, your normal map will display all that stuff. So you can have a really low poly model that looks high poly. It's a really cool workflow and really cool technique. So a lot of people will do that in these situations. If they're making a game asset, they'll model a very high poly model, but then eventually reduce it down to a lower poly model. And I may do that for this, but that's kind of, in the distant future. So I'm not thinking about that or planning for that at the moment. Right now, I'm just trying to get something that looks as good as I can possibly get it to look without diminishing returns, right? Like you can pour a lot of effort and detail into things that in the grand scheme of things don't really matter that much. So you just, you have to use your best judgment. You have to be an artist, right? One of the biggest I'll share with you guys, one of the biggest sort of pet peeves as a teacher is just students asking for their hand to be held, right? What do I do now? What do I do next? What next? What next? Right? I understand the need or the I understand why you want to just get every step right, and you want to make sure that you get your mentor's approval on everything, right? But there's a lot of stuff you just can't learn unless you're willing to fail and do things wrong. So, a lot of times when I get that from my students, I'll just say, I want you to be an artist and I want you to make your own decisions and figure it out on your own. And that's hard to hear sometimes because, especially if you're in college and you just want to get a good grade, right? That's your number one priority. But as an artist, your grade shouldn't be that big of a priority to you. Your success is measured in the quality of your artwork, right? Not your grade. So, if you have to fail a few times to get a high quality piece of art out of it, then that's a necessary thing that you need to do. So, yeah, I will say this quite a few times, just do it the wrong way. You'll learn so much more from doing things the wrong way than doing them the right way. So what I end up doing here basically is just, modeling this one corner as much as I can. I'm actually even going to go as far as to model the little screw hole in this. Which I don't do it precisely. I don't make it exactly circular, but I'm okay with that. I think there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of human error in things from time to time. So I'm okay with this not being exactly a perfect circle exactly. So, as long as it looks good, it is good. And overall, I think that turned out fine. But the idea here is just to model that one corner, and then I can go around and just duplicate it and just kind of manipulate that into position. And, I'm saving time because I don't have to model the same thing over and over again. And I think the front and back parts of this roof rack are slightly different, but I think they're similar enough. This roof rack actually ended up being a little bit easier than I expected it to be. And it's worth, mentioning that that happens a lot. I think one of the most valuable things that I've learned as an artist over the years is, I know I keep repeating this, but sometimes you just got to do things the wrong way. You could sit there and sort of think about how to do it the right way for days and days and days and just never get anything done. Right. But you just got to kind of dig your heels in and do something. Right. And I think you learn a lot from that. And if you collect reference and analyze your reference and observe your reference, right, you will eventually learn how to look at something in a way where you can break it down into its simpler shapes. So you'll look at a piece that you need to model. Like, for example, after this video, we're going to jump into modeling the windshield wipers. And the windshield wipers it's a pretty complex component, right? There's a lot of details going on in windshield wipers. And I'm going to try to simplify them as much as I can. But they're very intimidating when you first kind of look at them for the first time. But just study your reference. Don't think of it so much as a whole, but think of it as individual pieces. Don't think of your windshield wipers as the windshield wipers. Think of them as, this section of thing being made up of 5 or 6 different parts. And just start with one of those parts and just model one of those parts at a time. And that will kind of curb that intimidation a little bit. Eventually, you'll get the confidence where you can look at something, and even if you're intimidated by it, which is completely natural, if you analyze it and kind of study it enough, you'll break it down to a point where you're like, okay, I got this. I can do this. So, if you're intimidated by the complexity of something that you want to model, just try to break it down into smaller pieces. And this roof rack, like I said, it ended up being a lot easier than I expected it to be. Once I started thinking about it. And, a lot of times as you're modeling stuff, you start generating ideas and you start generating a plan, just the simple act of modeling, right? So you could sit there and just stare at it and say, should I do it this way or should I do it that way? But until you actually just start to do it, it's just going to be ideas in your head, right? So, again, if you just do something, even if you do it the wrong way, as you're doing it the wrong way, a lot of times you'll kind of develop a plan to do it better the correct way, right? So just don't be afraid to dive in and start modeling something, even if you don't really know what you're doing, right? Eventually you'll figure it out. So I think that turned out pretty good. Next, I'm going to model the roof rails. So how these old roof racks worked is that frame part here that I'm modeling. I'm kind of organizing and naming things now. That was just kind of meant to keep stuff from sliding off the roof. This piece didn't actually get any. This piece wasn't meant to have weight on top of it. This is just kind of like a fence or barrier so things don't slide off the roof, right? And then the parts that I'm about to model here, the rails, that's where your luggage or whatever will just sit right on top of those things. So I decide to model these 2 at a time. I could have just done it once, but I think I'm going to actually save time by trying to model these 2 at a time. So I just duplicate those strips. They're pretty much identical, but they do have each slightly different curves because they match the curvature of the roof. So I'm just starting out with these strips, and I noticed that one on the right there is a little bit thicker. So I'm just coming in and kind of trimming a piece of it off so it's the same width. So we get both of those pretty close to the same width. And then I'm just going to combine them together, and I'm just going to try to model these both at the same time. So I duplicate them again, and then I end up trimming this down because the little black rubber strip is a little bit wider than the metal part that sits on top of it. So here I'm just kind of going through and trimming some of the excess off to make it just a little bit smaller, as you can see. So I'm just trying to extrude them the same time, kind of give them the same profile. And then I'm going to actually extrude the center strip down, so it's kind of like a mounting rail, if that makes sense. So things can kind of slide into them. And you'll see that I'm just deleting those faces right there. That's because I know I'm going to extrude this down, and I would delete those extra faces there. And then because I deleted those faces, I can just really easily go in and target weld those corners up. And then I'm going to come in and bevel all of my corners on this. Again, not beveling all of my edges, just all of my corners. If I go in and bevel all the edges, I'm adding just a bunch of unnecessary geometry. And even though we're modeling this high poly, that doesn't mean I should just carelessly add geometry where I don't need it. So I'm beveling those edges so they look really nice, smooth. And then I have that made one end-gon right there. So I'm just going in and fixing that end-gon. Eventually you'll learn, right? Like when you're first learning, you're relying heavily on that mesh cleanup function to tell you where all of your end-gons and non-manifold geometry are. But eventually you'll learn, okay, when I bevel this type of corner, it's going to make an end-gon. So you can just, without even running mesh cleanup, you can go in and fix those issues. So yeah, those turned out pretty good. I'm putting those back in position there. And I end up moving the one over a little bit because you'll see when I duplicate them, there's a little bit, they're not evenly spaced, right? So I'm looking at that and say, those aren't very evenly spaced. So I take those two in the middle and just kind of slide them over a little bit. And I'm just eyeballing it. Again, sometimes having a little bit of human error in it just adds to the realism. And then I'm just going to combine them together to make them one object. So there's the metal part, and then I'll combine together those black rubber plastic strips. And overall, I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to model the holes where the windshield wipers come out. Now, this is another thing that can be kind of intimidating when you have a piece of your model that looks really nice and you don't want to potentially mess it up by modeling a new form onto that model. What I will do is I will just duplicate the area that I want to model that piece on. So I'll just duplicate that little area right there. And then I'll model that new form on that little duplicated piece. And then I can get it right without the notion sitting in the back of my head that I could be messing up my entire model. Right? It just makes it easier for my brain to wrap around the shape and the form of it. And I don't have to think about, how the edges will flow throughout the entire model. It's just a lot less to think about when you do it like this. So that's kind of why I separated this piece out rather than modeling it directly on that part of the hood. Now I actually do model this bigger than it needs to be. So you'll see me in a moment. I do spend some time just trying to scale it down to get the scale right, because I did model that quite a bit bigger than it needs to be. And this is something that's not symmetrical, right? You'll see that there's kind of like an offset in my reference image down there. So this is something that I would wait to do until after you merge both of your halves together. It's not necessary. I suppose you could do it while you're still working on the symmetry. You're just going to have to like delete it from one half and move it around. So, but for me, I think it's just easier to do it after I've combined both sides together. So here's where I'm realizing, okay, that's way too big. So I'm going to come in and try to just scale that whole circular piece down a little bit. And I think I scale it down even a little bit more after this. Right? I'm just kind of comparing it to the size of my vent holes. Right? And again, it's all about observation. Observe your reference and observe your model and compare the difference. Think about the difference. You know, the most important skill you can have here is observation, whether it's observing your reference or observing your own model. I can't stress enough how important just observational skills as an artist are. I would say it's probably the most important thing. Okay, now I'm just going through and I'm merging up those verts that need to be merged. And then I'll go in with target weld and kind of clean this up. Right. But now it's, you know, I was able to do this in a way where I'm not affecting my finished piece so much. And then when I have it sort of everything looking good, then I can just attach it to my finished piece. So again, it's sort of a lot of this has to do with just like mitigating your own intimidation of how complex a model looks like it is, and figuring out ways to bypass the scariness, right? Okay, like this is going to be scary modeling this part in because I could potentially mess up what I've already done a really good job on. How do I mitigate that? How do I skip that? And how can I do this in a way that doesn't ruin something that I've already spent a lot of time and effort on? Yeah, and then I just take that circle that I already have and I duplicate it and I attach it to that other part of the car. And, you know, overall, that turned out pretty good. So here I'm going to spend some time doing a thumbnail render, you know, reassigning my plastic material to everything and trying to figure out a good thumbnail render for this video. In the next video, we're going to jump into doing the windshield wipers. And again, windshield wipers are one of those things that can be intimidating because they're a pretty complex piece of model, right? You could potentially, if you wanted to, you could just spend as much time modeling the best possible windshield wiper you could as modeling the car. Right. So it's just completely dependent on how much time you want to pour into it. I'm going to try to simplify them quite a bit and break them down into just basic shapes. So you'll see that in the next video, and enjoy, and I'll see you guys there.